Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to be here today with Joshua Cameron, and I'm going to let him give an introduction, but we're here to talk about a topic that, I love talking about, but it's unfortunate how rampant it is, but that's PTSD and men and, just being able to heal and go through that. And there's so many stigmas and things with that. But with that said, Joshua, please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hey, I really appreciate the time. I appreciate the space that you're holding here. We talked in the green room before just about how hard it is for men to let their guard down and
Mhm.
become vulnerable and share their story. And I born and raised in Utah as a secular kid, which means that it was difficult for me. I was raised in a family that didn't really know love, a lot of alcoholism, a lot of rage, just rage monstrosity, a lot of physical and mental abuse. And so I didn't really have any parents that could like show me love or like what that was. So I didn't really know how to trust myself.
Mhm.
Later I joined the army, and I didn't realize it at the time, but when I went to my first war zone 8 days after September 11th 2001, and then when we got back less than a year later we went to our second war zone. Um, when I came back, I could feel that I was different, but I couldn't put my finger on it. I felt like a shadow of who I was. I didn't know how to talk about it because I wasn't taught how to
Yeah.
talk about my feelings. I was expected to just rub some dirt on it. Rub some dirt on it, Cameron, right?
Yeah.
Take some Motrin and drive on.
Moving
Yep.
on. Yep.
Yep,
Yep.
exactly.
Yep.
And going through, my trauma, what I realized, right, there was a part where my life really started falling apart and all the walls around my heart fell over. And what I didn't realize is that walls are indiscriminate. And what I mean by that is that a wall doesn't know what's good for you and what's bad for you. A wall is just going to block.
Yep.
And imagine yourself, in a time where, and I guarantee this has happened with almost everyone, if not everyone, where you've given a small gift to somebody and they just lit up like, oh my God, that's so thoughtful. Thank you so much. And you're like, holy crap, I want to give a gift to you like every day now.
Yes.
Versus the person that you give a gift to, and they're like, that's it?
Yeah.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
that's the difference between being in a place of receiving and not. That's the difference between having walls up and
Mm-hmm.
not. Because when we have walls up to protect us from what's bad, it also protects us from what's good because walls are indiscriminate.
Yep. 100%. Well, I want to start, but too, saying thank you so much for your service, and
Oh,
that's why. And I know it's such a, yeah, it's such a hard thing to be able to come home and process. And so, what is it that led you to reach out for help, and where did you reach out for help? How'd you even begin that? Because it's like you don't even know what's going on. You, like you said, you just know you feel different. Your
mhm.
walls are up. But so where did you even begin?
Well, I unfortunately was very hard headed. And so I started with logic. And logic was like, okay, well, what do I know that I like that comes from our logical, frame of reference? Well, philosophy.
Mhm.
And philosophy really helped me, Plato, Aristotle, Nietzsche, Ken Wilber, and the Matrix. And so
Mhm.
the Matrix is actually what introduced me to Ken Wilber, because if you listen to the Matrix commentary, well, there's two amazing living philosophers like that are alive right now that
Yep.
share these ideas. And one is Cornel West, who's also running for president right now, um, and the other is Ken Wilber. And both of them are phenomenal. And that started open me up to this idea of spirituality. I wasn't quite ready for it, but it at
Yep.
least opened it up for me to where I could start to listen to it and not quite reject it, because I can say I have a reference point in Ken Wilber. I respect him. He's
Yep.
into this woo woo spirituality stuff. So I know that there's value, just not for me. And for a long time I did that, not for me, right? There's
Yep.
value there, but not for me. And often, like anybody, we just have to try, right?
Yeah.
Hey, what's good for me? I don't know. Let's try something and see what
Yeah.
works. And you know
Yep.
what? The universe works off of feedback, and
Mhm.
not just feedback, but escalating feedback. So
Yep.
if we try something, right, and maybe it doesn't work, and then we're hard headed and we say, well, let me try that again, because obviously, everyone else is just stupid, right? They don't know the value that I'm bringing, so they're all the dummies. And let me just go ahead and keep doing it again. Well, there's going to be a purpose that I would say directly comes from our soul.
Yep.
And that whisper from our soul is going to start off exactly that, as a whisper. And if we ignore it, well,
Yeah.
then it's going to start maybe a little bit louder voice. And if we
Yep.
ignore it, well, then it's going to start shouting. And if we ignore it, it's going to give us a shove. And if we ignore it, we're going to find ourselves off the side of the road.
Yep.
And it's just going to build up and build up and build up until we simply cannot ignore it anymore. All the walls fall flat. And when they do, well, in that space of confusion, that's when we've probably got the least amount of noise in our head, and the whisper can start to come through. And
Mm.
that's what we can start to train ourselves through meditation on how to
Yep.
quiet the noise to increase the signal. And that phrase, actually, quiet the noise to increase the signal, is something that I picked up in data analytics, working in state of the art pediatric hospital here in at the University of Utah.
Yep.
And so what's amazing is that what science says almost always has some sort of component that can be used in spirituality. But we think that they should be at loggerheads, but they're not, right?
Oh,
It's just the head side of a coin and the tail side of a coin. And whichever way we flip it and look at it, well, let's use what works for us. Let's lean into what makes us feel good, especially if we're contributing to people around us, we're contributing to ourselves, and we feel good. Well, who cares what other people say is right or wrong? That feeling is what's telling you what's right or wrong.
yeah, 100%. And it's funny because I'm pretty spiritual myself. And it happened because I was in a session. I don't even know what kind, Reiki, something, but I felt this inner peace and happiness. And then all of a sudden it was like this, just I felt light, I felt whatever, and I was like, this is how I want to feel. Like, so having even just a taste of it was like, okay. And it's not like, I mean, life is hard, and even working towards that and working through things and going through, but having a taste of it, I was like, wait, this is how I can feel. Like,
Yeah.
it doesn't have to be so heavy and hard and everything like that. It is hard, but what was the turning point for you?
Yeah. Great question. Well, it started off, and I'll try not to be too, verbose in this, but it was a bit of a circuitous path, right? I started off when I was kind of having the dark night of my soul, so much chaos going on around me. All those walls fell flat. I started off, okay, well, there's this chaos going around. How do I create order out of this chaos? Who
Mhm.
can I tune into? Well, then there was a podcast by Jocko Willink, right, who was a former
Yeah.
Navy SEAL commander. Was like,
Yep.
if anybody can help me with chaos, this dude can. Well,
Yep.
he then interviewed Jordan Peterson. I hadn't listened to much Jordan Peterson, so I started listening to him, like, oh my God, everything this guy's saying makes so much sense. So then he started secularizing Genesis, in the book of Genesis. And instead of saying, hey, look at this book in the Bible that you're supposed to take literally, he said, this is just oral traditions that have said, this is how great people have lived. And this is how they've reached greatness. And we've cataloged that. Now we've been telling these stories, to, our culture in order to help emulate that. It's like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Like, so from this frame of reference, is there room for God in my life?
Mhm.
And what I learned is that questions are the steering wheel of the mind, right? I can say, hey, Kate, is that gum on your shoe? And where does your head go? Where does your mind go? Or I can say, is there room for God in my life? And what does that do?
Yep.
Well, it opens me up. And then within 2 weeks, I had a vision of a podium. Following that vision of a podium, I knew I was supposed to be speaking at a Mormon church, but like an atheist, maybe agnostic at best. What do I do? I
Yeah.
just walk in and say, "Hey, Bishop, move over. I got this. I
I had
had
a
this.
vision.
I had this
Like,
download, and
let
I'm
me
supposed to."
yeah.
Um, and long story short, I found out that every first Sunday of the month, anybody who shows up to the congregation can speak to them for 5 minutes and just share from their heart. And by the third time I did that, I created the highest ideal of goodness of which I can conceive,
Mhm.
which was Gandalf. But not Gandalf, who was fighting the giant Balrog in the mines of Moria that he never wanted to go to in the first place, or
Yep.
who fought against the Witch King, or the armies of Mordor who terrified him. But the Gandalf who saw value in what nobody else saw,
Yep.
right? The hobbits, right? These childlike looking figures who weren't building large armies, who weren't building large castles, who weren't building large roads, who weren't adding to the commerce around the world, but who had more love of community and love of life than anybody else. And that love kept actually inoculated them against the evil of the ring and kept the world from burning.
Mhm.
And within 6 months, this man named Peter Sage, who later became my mentor, and I joined his 6 month internship and mentorship. He then taught me about consciousness and neuroscience and psychology and
Mhm.
how and spirituality. And then within 3 months of this mentorship, poof, well, this guy named Ed Stracher comes to my life, who is, claims to be this spiritual healer, who I've seen these testimonials of people who are like, hey, I have a week left to live because I have cancer, to then 2 years later saying, Ed, you saved my life.
Mhm.
You saved. I was like, what?
Mhm.
What? And
Huh.
so, like you, he offered a meditation. I went through it. I was like, what is, I feel this. I feel this in my bones. And
Yep.
like, what is going on here? And he then said one day, hey, I'm actually going to be teaching people how to do this. And I was like a kid with a golden ticket out of a candy bar, just like shaking it, just
Uh,
running. Like I just knew I had to be a part of this.
yeah.
And, that's,
Yep.
basically the beginning of all that.
Well, that's and I know it's been such a long journey and stuff, and not like I said, it never is easy to try and heal from PTSD and everything like that. But what were your biggest challenges going through this and on your journey?
We hide things from ourselves, right? And there's this idea that shamans have of soul retrieval. Have you ever heard of that?
I've heard it. I don't know too much about it. So
Yeah. So I think a great way to look at it is that when our frame of reference is so violated, our model of the world is so violated, whether it be because of war or maybe because your childhood is like a war zone. Well, what
yeah.
happens is a piece of our soul, a piece of that goodness, well, it's almost like it gets broken off and it's imprisoned in
Mhm.
that place, which is why people talk about doing, inner child work, because
Yeah.
you've got to go back to that place and go back in time,
Yep.
and in order to be able to solve that, in order to be able to heal that. And there's a famous experiment in physics called the double slit experiment, which was basically how they proved that we live in some form of a simulation. And with a double slit experiment, they're shooting electrons right through these two slits, just like you might see in like an outlet, right, without a ground, just two slits. But they kept finding that based upon the data, if they didn't have anyone capture the data, that every electron they shoot through would come through as a wave. But if they captured the data, it would come through as a particle.
Wow.
But not only did it come through as a particle, and shoot through the slits as a particle, it went back in time and rewrote from the machine that it came out as a particle, even though they know that it came out as a wave. It came out as a light wave. And like,
Wow.
well, what the heck is going on? And this is the bizarre nature of quantum physics and quantum mechanics. Well, and
Yep.
this is, the quantum realm is what, mystics would call the spiritual realm.
Yep.
And when we realize that the quantum realm has the ability to go back in time and rewrite the code, well,
Wow.
that's what that soul retrieval is doing, is you're
Okay.
going back to where that code was corrupted,
Yep.
right? Just like a computer code. And
Yep.
you go and you defrag, you go and you update, maybe do a patch, a rootkit, root patch update, and
Yep.
then you go ahead and run that through the system, and then you harmonize and bring that back together. And so understanding how computers work is a great way of understanding how, the quantum space works when we close our eyes, touch into our soul, and just, and find the programming that works best for us.
So is that how would that work on a human? Like that's kind of I think you're explaining, but like is that what meditation does? Or, is that what are some of the tools that we can use to go back and almost rewrite that and do the inner child work and stuff like that?
That's a great question. I'll give you an example from my own life. Now, people may not be able to get into the same state, that I was in when I started this, because I had the training of a master healer who actually helped me get into this energy that I could feel through every fiber of my being. But I had this intuitive thought that I should go to a deprivation tank after I started learning how to heal myself. So this is
Yep.
before I even learned how to heal other people, because
Yep.
you got to first learn how to heal yourself and lead yourself somewhere before you dare lead others, to
Yep.
that place. So in this deprivation tank, I'm going through my meditations. I'm feeling my body vibrating. I can feel the energy coursing through me. And then in this place where, I feel more love than I've ever felt in my life, but more than that, truth. Because I think that truth actually is higher than love. As powerful as love is,
Yep.
right? Love can be kind of swayed a little bit. Truth knows all, and truth is that governing agent. And so with that truth and that love, opening myself up, I got this whisper of what I should do is create the grossest memory of my life. It's like, okay, well, I feel safe. I feel
Hmm.
amazing. Well, why not? I'm game. And, physics proves again that everything in our world, everything that we call, matter, everything that we call real, my hat, my glasses, your hair, my
Yep.
nose, right? Your shirt, right? Is nothing but waves of light that have collapsed into particle matter reality,
Hmm.
which means that we again likely live in some form of a hologram. So in this place of feeling amazing, just like a hologram, I created this emotion, or I
Yep.
created this memory rather, and then I created the little boy version of me that experienced this memory.
Yep.
And then, since I didn't have love in my life, I didn't have parents that could actually console me and tell me how to, how to handle these things, how to understand this, how to grow from this. And that little boy was trapped. Well, who better to untrap him than me? So
Hmm.
what I did is I projected myself as I was then.
Yep.
So now I've got the adult version of me.
Hmm.
And the great reference I have here is that, so this is, 6, 7-year-old version of me. And I've got an 8-year-old little boy at this time.
Hmm.
So what do? Well, I hold his hand the same way I'd hold my son's hand.
Yep.
And then what I did from there, so now I've got truth and love and this great, barrier, this great, aura of energy that is now coming, this memory as I'm watching it is filtering through this truth. And as it's filtering through the truth, it's unhooking. Oh, that doesn't even make sense to feel guilty over. That wasn't your fault. Oh, there's no reason to feel shame. That doesn't even, and then with every place where it's unhooked, that vacuum was then filled with that love.
Yep.
And then what I did is I took that awareness and then I passed it through my hand to that little boy.
Yep.
And then what I did was I summoned all the love that I have for my son, because learning how to love my son taught me how to love myself. And
Hmm.
so I took all that feeling and all that joy I have loving my son, and I knelt down. I embraced myself the same way I'd embraced my son. And I
Yep.
said, I love you. And I
Hmm.
just broke down crying.
Hmm. No, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your
Yeah.
story and being vulnerable. And I know it's a really difficult thing to do, but it's just, I think this is such a common challenge for especially men in general, but just even on the healing journey. And so, how do you work with who do you work with actually now, and how do you work with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've actually worked with people across 5 different continents.
Mhm.
So it really just depends on, what people are looking for. Most often, right? If
Mhm.
you're familiar with the book, The Body Keeps the Score by
Yep.
Bessel van der Kolk, um, people understand the idea of the mind causing physical issues, right? Because the mind is the dimension above the body. And so often what we do is we take these horrific things that happen to us and we hold them in and we shove them down. And if we're
Yep.
shoving them down, well, the dimension lower than the mind is the body. And
Yep.
that's where we're shoving it, and the body's holding on to that.
Mhm.
Well, what what prevents that mind and that body from healing is, since everything is energy, right? That's what Albert Einstein said. Everything is energy, right?
Mhm.
Max Planck, his contemporary, said, consciousness is primary. Everything is consciousness, right? Hermetic philosophy says, the all, or God, the all is mind, the universe is mental. So what we're experiencing is a creation of the mind, or perhaps the mind of God coming from our soul.
Yep.
And where is the dimension of the soul? Well, the dimension of light,
Yep.
that brings about everything. But what happens is when these dark things happen to us, there's energy fields that then connect to that soul that create almost like a Faraday cage. Are you familiar with a Faraday cage?
Oh.
So your microwave is a good example of one. If you've got a cell phone and you stick it in your microwave and close the door, chances
Yep.
are nobody's going to be able to call that phone or be able to text it, because it's going to have no signal. And so what happens is these dark energy fields will then create a suppressor. So
Yep.
when we've got that signal to reach our soul, well, it's just suppressing it.
Yep.
And so being able to find a mentor, a guide to be able to bust through that energy field, to bust through that Faraday cage, well,
Yep.
then you can renew and reinvigorate that connection to your soul. You quiet the noise, you
Yep.
increase the signal, like Lao Tzu, who wrote the Tao Te Ching, or at
Mhm.
least credited as, said, to the still mind, the entire universe surrenders.
Yep.
Because now you're tapping into that soul, and that soul is effectively, right? I like to look at a soul as how Dolores Cannon talks about it. And if you're familiar with her, a great mystic, she talks about how, again, God is like this giant amalgam of light. And I'm not interested in, what, label people want to put on God, right? That doesn't really matter to me. As long as God serves you and serves those around you, hey, that's awesome for me. But if you think of it as this giant amalgam of light, and our soul is the tiniest, ittiest, bittiest spark of light
Yep.
from that. Well, what's fascinating about the idea of a hologram is holograms are fractal in nature, which means that every piece of the hologram has the entire code of the entire hologram.
Yep.
Which means that, like the great mystic Rumi, right? I believe 14th century mystic, right? This is what he means when he says that you aren't a drop in the ocean,
Yeah.
you're the ocean in a drop.
Hmm.
So this is, so reaching that soul is being able to reach the power of the ocean. And
Yep.
that's the governing agent of everything in particle matter reality. And when the governing agent is at full power, well, then the mind and the body heal as a natural consequence. But when the
Yep.
governing agent is being drained by those, dark energies, well,
Yep.
then the body and the mind, well, they break down as a natural consequence. And it's, again, everything is energy.
Yep, 100%. No, that's you've done a great job articulating and explaining that. It's so funny because I've always known, like, I'm like, I don't know, I just feel better. I
Yeah.
never understand like what exactly is happening, especially from a spiritual perspective. I'll put it that way. How do you work with people when they come to you and they're kind of like stuck or can't go to those deeper levels of meditation? So even myself, for example, I don't want to say not great at meditating. I don't want to put it out there, but I have hard a time quieting the mind and doing things. So how do you work with people, and what's your program look like in general? And how do you work with them to overcome some of those challenges of, if they can't get into that state of you know,
Yeah,
focus?
for sure. Yeah, those are great questions. Well, a lot of people feel like they're supposed to use their thoughts to silence their thoughts. And that doesn't really make sense, because if you bring energy to something, you're energizing it. So
Yeah.
often what will happen is they'll close their eyes and be like, okay, no thoughts. Well, that's
Yeah.
already a thought. And
Focus
then
on the
they
breath.
say,
And it's
yeah,
like, oh,
well, and
thank
focus. So that's actually a great one right there. You don't
yeah.
tell yourself focus on the breath, you just do it.
Yeah.
And what you can do is you can just inhale. And a great thing to do is to focus on your heartbeat.
Mhm.
And as you focus on your heartbeat, that gives your brain something to do,
Yep.
something passive for to do. And the thing is, right now, right, maybe even after this podcast, like, it doesn't take a lot of time. You can literally take all of your mental focus and put it in the tips of your finger, put it in your left elbow, put it in your right knee. And if you close your eyes and just do that, even for a minute, I guarantee you're going to start feeling your heartbeat in that place. And so
Mhm.
just put your mental concentration somewhere in your body, feel your heartbeat. And as you feel your heartbeat, just allow your mind to count the beats of your heart. And typically what I do is I will breathe in for 5 and breathe out for 7.
Mhm.
And that rhythm is something my mind can hold on to, and it can relax, and all the other noise just goes away.
Yep.
And the mind is so good at processing thoughts that it's likely still going to have thoughts. So when it does, the point isn't to eradicate the thoughts, the point is to observe them. The
Mhm.
same way that if you're looking out a great bay window and a bird flies by and you've got no interest in following it, you say, hey, thanks for making my view look better,
Yep.
but I'm not trying to follow this. But inevitably a bird will catch your attention, a thought will catch your attention. And at that point, what you do is you just let it go. You don't say, oh crap, I'm following my thoughts. You just let it go. And so when I'm working with somebody, I can tune in. Hey, your mind's at 5%.
Mhm.
That's not bad, but you know,
Yep.
here's what I want your mind to focus on. Focus on your heart. As you
Yep.
focus on your heart, your mind will go still, and I'll get them in that rhythm. And having that soft, gentle reminder from somebody watching them really helps them fall right in there. And usually the feedback I get is, I've never gone that deep in meditation before.
Yeah.
I've had guided meditations before, but I've never gone that deep before. Well, because it's not what you learn,
Mhm.
it's who you learn it from. And that's
Yeah.
how it's always been with every great teacher in my life.
Yep. 100%. That makes sense. And do you have a sort of program that people like, okay, someone comes to you tomorrow and they work with you, do you have a recommended, because I know it's not like, one session is always helpful, but a healing is a journey. And so,
Yeah.
what does that journey look like working with you?
Yeah, great question. So I always talk to people first because I don't just offer my services if I don't know what's going on,
Yep.
right? Because then I tune in to figure out, okay, are there these dark energy fields, right? And then if it's something new that I've never dealt with, well, then
Hmm.
I tune in, do I have permission? Right? This might sound weird to some people and might challenge some people's model of the world, but every single one of us has beings in this spiritual world that help guide us, right? People call them spirit guides, right? Some people might refer them as angels.
Yep.
Um, and if they don't know that I'm coming from a benevolent space that I'm trying to help, well, they may actively block me. So then do I have permission to
Yep.
heal this person? And if I don't, well, then, I might give you some free resources. I might, maybe
Yep.
guide you in a better place. But if I do, well, then I'll talk them through. And, typically that ends up being working together for about 2 months. Now,
Yep.
most people feel, for instance, lady in South Africa,
Hmm.
right? She, recently went through the death of her husband. But more than that, he'd been wasting away in a nursing care facility for years.
Wow.
And when she'd show up and be like, "Hey, there's these giant bed sores on my husband. Like, you guys aren't taking care of him. What's going on?" They'd say, "Oh, you're a white lady in South Africa. You must be racist." So now she's getting even more stress put on that. And
Hmm.
he's about 275 pounds, and she's like a buck 60. So trying to take care of him, well, she tore her right bicep tendon.
Wow.
Yeah, and been torn for years. And she said literally just the to reach out her car window and grab like a parking validation, or to reach up into her cupboard and grab a cup, she said would literally bring her to her knees in pain.
Wow.
She went to an orthopedic surgeon. She went to physical therapy. She went to a chiropractor. She said literally everything that she did, it brought her more pain.
Yep.
I took her through nothing more than a meditation. And within 5 days, not only was that pain gone, but she had 30% more, functional movement in her arm. After 3 weeks, she had 70% more functional movement.
Wow.
And this is what happens when, again, you don't change from the level of chemistry, right? So often we're looking for a pill. Well,
Yeah.
the chemistry is already that light that has come down and turned into a particle to enter this particle matter reality.
Hmm.
But what governs that is, again, the light. So when we tap into the level of the soul, and so I helped her with her grief as well. I
Yeah.
had such a lovely session, and invited her husband, the
Hmm.
soul of her husband, to come join this. And she's big on Jesus. I'm not the biggest advocate of the Bible, but Jesus is somebody I find quite swell. I love his teachings. I love his love. I love everything that he talks about. In fact, if you're familiar with the Tao Te Ching is all about flow, as well as if you give evil nothing to oppose, it'll go away on its own. Not
Yep.
because it's not there, but because you can step out of its way. And every single time, up until the story of Jesus being crucified, every single time somebody tried to pin him down, he would just step right out of the way. He wouldn't confront them. He wouldn't tell them that they're not using the right pronouns. He wouldn't tell them that they're not using the right political ideology. He wouldn't throw in their face what bad people that they are and don't they know how insensitive they're being. He would simply step out of the way, and then they would see the folly in their actions, and everyone watching you just like, holy cow, that's incredibly masterful. And so he really showed the way, right? And the Tao Te Ching is the book of the way, and he lived it more than anybody that I've ever seen historical reference to.
Mhm. And so can you talk a little bit, I know we touched on it a little bit, but it's so funny because it's still such a hard concept to grasp, I think, with
Mhm.
like quantum physics and then like what's happening. So can you talk a little bit more about what's happening when you do meditate? And again, I know you did go there, but
Mhm.
like for this woman, for instance, when she's in meditation, how is the body physically healing itself from that meditation?
So there are certain things that we just don't know that I can guess at, right? Because I didn't have X-ray at the time, so I don't. And
Yes.
so
Yep.
what she was told is that she's got so much scar tissue that scar tissue needs to be broken down before she's ever going to heal.
Okay.
Okay, well, that scar tissue is going to be around, not just the fact that she tore her tendon,
Yep.
but all the grief and all the trauma and all the like, here I am trying to help my husband and I'm being called a racist. Here I
Yeah.
am trying to help my husband, and I tear my arm. What else can happen, world? What else can happen, universe? Yeah,
Yeah.
and all those words, all that negativity is built into that scar tissue. So what I
Okay.
did is I came in and dissolved that scar tissue with love,
Yep.
with truth, with the power of, her greatest ideal of goodness and love was her husband and Jesus. So I brought them in as well. And so
Mhm.
now she's opening herself up to this powerful love. And then there's Jesus, and her husband there to really help her understand, hey, this is the truth of the matter. And that's how that all dissolved. Now, if you aren't using, doing these sorts of spiritual meditations and you're just meditating in general, well,
Yep.
what you're doing is you're allowing the brain to relax. You're allowing the brain to then sift all the noise. And when
Yeah.
and then quiet the noise. And when it quiets the noise, well, we already know through, neuroscience that the brain can tap into more dimensions than our body can. And
Yep.
so when we do that, well, then our heart has 40,000 neurons in it, and it's almost constantly sending signals to our brain. So when we quiet the noise, well, then our intuition gets stronger and we learn to listen to it more. And then we just learn to do the things again that feel good. And when it feels good and it puts a smile on other people's faces, well, then we know that we're probably actually doing good as well.
Yep, 100%. No, that does help break it down too. It's so funny because, like I said, I I believe in that and I'm very spiritual, but I was like, I don't even know what's going on. I know our bodies are incredible, our minds are incredible, but I don't really understand how it works, but it
Yeah.
does. So yeah, no, that's great. And what's the best piece of advice that you received while you were on your journey?
So the great master who, taught me how to heal, um, get out of your head.
Mhm. Yep.
This is all heart. Like the most powerful healers, right? They come from a heart-centered space. And the thing is the heart is the gateway to the soul.
Mhm.
And as the heart's the gateway to the soul doesn't have to think, hey, how do I do this? The soul just does it. Because the
Yep.
soul is again the ocean. The
Yep.
ocean doesn't need to think about, hey, how do I be powerful? It just is.
Mhm.
Water doesn't need to ask itself, where do I flow? It
Yeah.
just does.
Yep.
And so understanding through intention, creating an intention, letting go of the importance, because importance comes from here, intention comes from here. Creating the intention and just surrendering to the experience and allowing it to happen, and just get out of here and just allow it to happen. And that's probably the best advice that I ever got.
I feel like that's too that means even good and bad, like what we associate with good and bad happening, because sometimes you have to processing things is painful. So it's kind of like I think that we might start to go there being like, but I can't feel that because it's too painful to go there. So,
Mm,
but it's letting it happen. So
yeah.
yeah, you can process through it. What's your advice to people? Because I feel like you're very spiritual and open and you felt it, but what's your advice for people who also have potentially been through PTSD? There's such a stigma with men, especially
Mhm.
trying to get healing, and they might not be as spiritual as you are. Or so, what's your advice for people who have been through war or some other
Mhm.
form of PTSD and need healing, but don't necessarily this type might not resonate with them. So what's your
Sure.
advice for people like that?
Um, Again, observe our thoughts, observe our actions. And there's a great verse out of the Tao Te Ching that says that when man is born, he's soft and supple. And when a plant is born, it's soft and pliable. And when a man dies, he's stiff and rigid. And when a plant dies, it's dry and brittle. Therefore, those who are stiff and inflexible are
Yeah.
disciples of death. And
Mhm.
those who are soft and supple are disciples of life. And so if you catch yourself being rigid,
Yep.
somebody says something to you and you so rigidly need to be right, you need to prove yourself, you need to let them know how that they offended you or whatever that is, it doesn't mean that you're good or bad. It means you're inviting death.
Mhm.
And if you can allow it, right, water allows, water is life, right? And if you can just allow it to happen, hey, you know what, that guy said something, I
Yep.
disagreed with it, I'm going to allow it to happen. Why? Well, maybe freedom of speech, that's a good one to start off with.
Yep.
um, And if you allow it to happen and you're soft and you bend with the wind, well, guess what? The tree that doesn't bend with the wind snaps because it
Mhm.
invites death. The tree that bends with the wind is soft and supple. and it's inviting life. Again, it doesn't mean that you're a good person or a bad person. It just means that you're either inviting death, where entropy occurs, where the breakdown of all the systems that run our bodies, right? And which makes sense, because if you take that into where you're rigid, well, we're rigid when we feel like we're attacked. When we feel like we're being attacked, well, then that puts us in fight or flight. Well,
Yep.
what does fight or flight do? Well, it cascades chemicals throughout our body, but more than that, it pulls the blood from our life support, from all of our organs, and it pulls it from our core and puts it into our limbs so we can explode into action. But the thing is you're supposed to explode into action. An explosion happens, and then it doesn't. Then it's done. But we live there for so long, which means our life support is being robbed.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so when we can see where we're being rigid and just allow for a little bit of relaxation, hey, how do I relax? Take a breath. Just take a couple of breaths and just let it go.
Yep.
That's going to be a great way for you to start to invite life. Again, you don't need to change everything that you're doing. Just
No.
observe and just invite life. Just be more flexible and supple where you can.
I think too, just understanding that there's another way to live. Like you don't have to live with the weight of the world and what you've been through, and carrying all that, that there is light and joy and peace and happiness, and
Yeah.
not just the suck it up, suck it up, suck it up. This is how it has to be.
Because
So
that's stiff and rigid. Suck it up. Suck it up. Oh, I can't show any vulnerability. Suck it up. Right. Stiff and rigid.
yep.
Yes, sir. Right.
Yeah.
Oh, right. And
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And is there anything else that we didn't cover today that you want to talk about, or a message that you want to get out to people?
sure. Well, for those who feel like they aren't very good at meditating, right, you can actually get a free gift from, go to freemefrompains.com, right? So that's going to be a web page that I created. And you'll see that there's a place where you can download a free gift. It's a series of 4 different meditations. The very first one is going to be, hey, this is this is why meditation works.
Mhm.
And here's a brief, a brief 9-minute meditation to help you get your mind in the right place. And then from there, I started to build it to get you into a little bit more of this magical zone. Now, these are introductory meditations, but even still, even just yesterday, I had a lady from Canada. Again, I'm in Utah, not just in Utah, but these are recorded. I recorded these months ago.
Yeah.
And so she reached out to me dealing with chronic fatigue. Um, she's on disability. So it's like, well, you know what? The least I can do, right? You're a lovely soul. Let me give you this free gift. Right. In
Yeah.
less than 24 hours, she reached out to me and said, hey, I feel like I've got at least 30% more energy.
That's
Right.
amazing.
Instead of just walking my dogs and feeling like I just need to hit the floor, I can actually do stuff. I feel connected. I feel like I want to do stuff. And
Yeah.
that's the power of this. And they can literally, like I said, the lady in South Africa took 5 days. I took a Navy SEAL through, and within a day, his arthritis pain was gone. Within 3 days, he was back at the gym, putting weight up, on the bench press and actually working out even more. And this is what happens when you deal with the root cause and not just placate symptoms.
Yep. Yep. And that's when you're not just like, let's talk about your problems or talk about your feelings and stuff. This is like actually getting to the root of it
Yeah.
energetically.
Well, and I don't want to poo-poo talking about your feelings, because with more awareness, well, that's
Yes.
light. And the more awareness you have, the more you can shed that light. So if you talk about your feelings, then you have a eureka moment. Oh, wow, I didn't realize that about myself. Well, then pop into meditation and shine even more light there. So there's certainly great benefit to, sharing your feelings, to talking about your feelings.
Yes.
It
And
may not,
yeah, I didn't mean to. I guess I'm coming from a perspective of people who might hesitate to. So
yeah.
that's all. But sharing your feelings, being vulnerable is super important to healing and figuring out your true self. So
Yeah. I mean, there's so many times where I'm just having a conversation with somebody and something will come out like,
yeah.
whoa, do I actually believe that? I guess I do believe that. Wow. Or other
Yeah.
times, like, man, I wish I could have recorded that. I felt like that was pretty brilliant. Or other
Yeah.
times it's like, wow, I shouldn't say that again.
Yeah.
And thank you for being here to soundboard so I can see where there was a flaw in my logic. And so
Mhm.
that's why it's good to pull thoughts out of our, out of our head,
Mhm.
and, there's this idea coming back to Lao Tzu, right? Thoughts turn into words, words turn into actions, actions turn into habits, habits transform into your character, and character becomes your destiny. Or if you're familiar with Joe Dispenza, he would say that those habits become your personality, and your personality becomes your personal reality.
Mhm.
But it all starts with your thoughts, because thoughts are energy.
Yep.
And so how are we governing our energy? How, and are we filtering it through a place of death or a place of life?
Yep. Yeah, and that just breaks it down, super simple. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. What's your biggest piece of advice to people listening in?
Um, so especially as a guy, right? So let's come from, because I can't authentically speak from a place of being a woman because I don't know if you can tell with my facial hair
Yeah.
that that I'm not. But as a guy, we that stiff and rigidness makes us feel like, well, there's nothing wrong, therefore I fixed it, right? Because I have dealt with it, I moved on, I rubbed dirt on it. Well, then let's just fix the problem. And so
Mhm.
often somebody comes to us vulnerable. Maybe it's our wives, right? Maybe it's our girlfriends, maybe it's daughter, and well, women come much more from a heart-centered place, and this can teach us a lot because women, when they say, "Hey, honey, I've got this problem," what I found doesn't work. Oh, well, let me go ahead and tell you how to fix it. Oh, here's the solution to it. Almost
Mhm.
always, what they want is like, "Oh my God, honey, sounds like you had a really hard day. Can I
Mhm.
can I can I pour you a glass of wine? Can I spend some time with you?" Oh, he's listening to me. He hears me. He's giving me space. And
Yep.
so the fire isn't quite as important as the fire pit, that which holds space. And because if we can't hold space for ourselves, we're not going to be able to hold space for other people, right? The idea of judge not lest ye be judged isn't judge not lest Joshua is going to judge you, lest Kate's going to judge you, because who cares? Like,
Mhm.
really, is that going to, is your life going to fall apart because somebody else judges? No. The thought there is judge not lest ye be judged by the very judgments you're casting upon others. And as Tony Robbins says, the most powerful part of the human psyche is the need to be consistent with how we see ourselves,
Yep.
our identity. So as we're judging others, we're literally pulling ourselves down with those judgments because we're revealing. We may not realize we're revealing, but we're revealing to ourselves and the world, this is how we see ourselves.
Yep. 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 Which can be a lot to face that and overcome as well. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. No, I love that. Well, thank you so much for coming on and talking. I mean, I've learned a ton today. So, no, I just really appreciate you and your message and everything that you've been through and shared. And thank you for being vulnerable and coming on here to share with the listeners. And yeah, we're gonna have all information too of how to contact you and get in touch and everything like that too.
Perfect. No, again, I appreciate the space that that you're holding here, and glad to be here. I hope that that this resonates. And look, you might. Yeah, I was incredibly hard headed. I was so hard. I was so convinced of myself. I was so convinced. Well, if this is logical, then it makes sense, and if it makes sense, then it has value for me. But maybe the last thing I'd like to share is that there's nothing like logic to turn a grown person into a toddler. And what do I mean by that is that we'll go through this arithmetic of, does this make sense? Oh, no, it does not make sense. Oh, if it doesn't make sense, therefore it's got no value. There's no logical value there. If it's got no logical value, let me just go ahead and dismiss it. And as I'm dismissing it, I'm in real time folding my arms saying, no, I don't want to eat those vegetables I've never tried,
Yep.
because life is about experience.
Yeah.
And logic will keep us from experiencing life. And when you experience, well, that's living, lived,
Yep.
and lived backwards is devil. And the devil's in the details. Don't let the details and the noise in the mind be the devil that keeps you in place, but
Mhm.
live and find that light and just allow yourself to experience and see what makes sense for you.
Yeah, it does. I've never thought of it that way, but it does make so much sense. So it's like, and when people aren't being vulnerable and are carrying around a lot of that anger and sadness and grief, it is like dealing with a child, I guess you could say. So
Yeah.
yeah, yep. I don't mean that in any. Maybe I should rephrase that,
Well,
but
again, it's the soul retrieval.
Mhm.
We are a hurt child, and all kids are in a theta brainwave state. They're in a dream wave state, up until they're about 7.
Mhm.
And so we've been programmed. We've been
Yeah,
programmed up until about the age of 7. So yeah, it makes sense that that child who believed everything they were told, you're bad, you're
yeah,
not good enough. Well, then we're going to have all this baggage until we go and deal with it.
yep,
So we really do act like children.
yeah, yep. It makes sense. Yeah, total sense. So, no, again, thank you so much for coming. And this has been great. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
My pleasure. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for taking another holistic view of your health with us. I hope you've really enjoyed today's discussion, and as always, take control of your own wellness journey by exploring the practitioners and modalities available near you or on our directory at www.holistichealthcollab.com. Don't forget to subscribe here so you don't miss an episode, and you can also find more holistic health tidbits at Holistic Health Collab on Instagram. Please leave a rating and review to help us reach more people that might need to hear this information. If you have any questions about today's show or any ideas for future episodes, or if you just want to reach out, you can contact me directly, Kate Maslowski, at kate@holistichealthcollab.com. You can just put podcast in your subject line. Again, thank you so much, and I hope you have a great day.